All right, folks, so we're going to learn about something new today called logical operators and also about nested if statements. These are both examples of topics in making conditional expressions like if statements more complex, making them more powerful, capable of doing more advanced things. So here are some objectives for today. We're going to learn about logical operators, and so we can make more complex conditions, and we're going to learn about nested if statements so that we can have more than one. It's kind of like a case statement. We can have more than one code path or more than two code paths. All right, so we'll start by just reviewing if and else in case you forgot. Then we'll talk about logical operators, and then we'll talk about nested if statements. All right, so if-else review. So if you recall, an if-else statement says if, and then the computer checks a condition, and then if the condition is true, it does the top piece of code, and if the condition is false, it does the bottom piece of code. Now, this is old stuff now at this point. We should understand the if statement really well. So let me just give you a quick example. In this program, the user is asked to spell the word received correctly, and it's misspelled there in the title. So we could say if, then, and then we could say else and end if, right? This is a way you can set up your if statements before you begin at all. And then we can say, all right, if they spelled it right, well, hang on. So now we need to ask the computer a question. It needs to check to see whether they spelled this correctly. So we could say, if the text box has the word spelled correctly, then do one thing. Otherwise, do another. So to see if it's spelled correctly, we can say, if textbox1.text equals received, which is spelled correctly, it's EI, not IE, then give me a message box that says you're right. And if they didn't spell it right, else, give me something that says no. All right, so that's a simple example, and that's a review. We just learned about comparison operators, and here they are in front of us. So we got equals, not equal, and all this other stuff. And that's for just making the conditions a little bit more general. A quick example. Let's say that we have a girls' club, okay, and in order to get into the club, you have to be born after 1995, okay, because it's just for young girls, okay. So if you put the year in there and press the check my eligibility button, it should tell you whether or not you should be in the club or not. So we say if the textbox1.text is greater than 1995, so if you were born after 1995, then you're good to go into the club. Otherwise, you're not eligible. Okay, so we can use greater than instead of equals. These conditions can be more complex. All right, so now we're going to learn about logical operators, which are even, it's similar to the comparison operators that we just learned, but they do a little bit of a different function. All right, so logical operators are for more complex conditions. Instead of just equals or greater than, we can do more complicated things. So these are our conditions from before, right? If textbox1.text equals yes, if my variable is greater than or equal to 4, these are all examples of the conditions that go in the if statements. And logical operators, what they do is they allow us to have multiple parts of a condition. So we don't just have textbox1.text is equal to yes. We could have textbox1.text is equal to yes and something else, or textbox1.text equals yes or something else. So let me show you how that works. So let's go back to that same example that we were just doing. Let's say it's a girls' club. Not only do you have to be born after 1995, but you also have to be a girl. So the user is going to put their year they were born in up here, and then they're also going to put in whether they're a boy or a girl right there. Okay, so we need both a person to have been born after 1995 and be a girl to be eligible for the club. So we need two different things, two different conditions. So we ask the computer, does it say 1995 in the text box, or is it greater than 1995 in the text box, right? And we also say, does textbox2.text equal girl, right? Because they have to be both. And the key here for the logical operators, if we have two conditions like that and we want to use one if statement, if they both have to be true, we use a logical operator, and that's the word and there it is right in the middle. So now the computer's saying, all right, if textbox1.text is greater than 1995 and textbox2.text is equal to girl, then you're in the club. Otherwise, if either of those two things is not true, if you were born before 1995, you're too old. If you were a boy, you're not a girl, you can't be in the club. And then it goes down to the else and says tough luck. All right, so this is for your vocab sheet, right? This is the important stuff. There are two logical operators that we're going to work with. There are more, but this is what we're going to work with for now. One of them is and, that's the one we just saw. And for and to be true, both conditions must be true. So for example, like we just saw, textbox1.text has to be greater than 95, textbox2 has to equal girl. If we use and, both of those conditions have to be true for the overall thing to be true. Okay. Similarly, right, let's say we went back to our hot dog stand. If you sold more than 50 hot dogs and you sold 20 or more hot dogs, right, greater than or equal to, if you have an and in between them, both of those have to be true for the whole thing to be evaluated by the computer as true. Okay. If either one of the two individual conditions is false, then the overall if statement will go down to the else, even though just one of them is wrong. On the other hand, we have a different logical operator, and that's called or. Okay, and in or, only one of the two conditions has to be true. So, for example, if the person is older than 1995, or they're a girl, if either one of these is true, then they would be in the club. Okay, because an or says, okay, just one of these has to be true. If one of them is false, that's okay, as long as one of the two of them or both of them is true, then the whole thing is true. And similarly, right, if let's say we said if hot dogs is greater than 0 or sodas is greater than 0, then this will be true. So this would be if we sold any hot dogs or sodas, then this whole thing would be true. All right, so let me show you an example of how to use this like we were using it before, right? This is our example from before with the boy or girl in the year you were born. We can join them with an and, right? We can say, okay, if your age is greater than, or the year you were born is greater than 95 and you're a girl, then you're in the club. Let's try an or example. All right, now over here I've changed it. It says, what year were you born? Okay, so they still have to be born after 95. Okay, or it says enter adult or girl. So if it's a girl, then they have to be born after 1995. Okay, but if they're an adult, then it doesn't matter what year they're born, right? So we can say if the text box is above 95, or it says adult, then you're in the club. Easy, right? So even if an adult is born in 1960, okay, 1960 is less than 1995, but since they're saying that they're an adult and this is an or, just this is true, and so the overall thing is true. Or doesn't require both of them, just one of them. All right, now this gets a little confusing. What if we wanted it to say, okay, what year were you born? That's the same thing. We need to have them born after 95, okay? And what if the user can enter adult, boy, or girl? That gets tricky, right? So we can say, all right, if they're greater than 95, and then we can't just say or here, because then if it's a boy, okay, let's say it's a boy born in 97, right? He shouldn't be in the club, right? Because he's a boy. Doesn't matter when he's born. But since he was born after 97, this is true, and if we put an or here, that means the whole thing is true. Okay, so that is an example to show us that logical operators are not everything that we need. We also need something called nested if statements if we want our if statements to be super, super awesome. So let's learn about one last thing, and this is going to be the trickiest thing that we're going to learn before we take a break for winter break. So make sure you're paying really close attention to nested ifs.